29 through 34. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
When I went to college, I was a gymnast. And every Saturday morning, my teammates and I would teach gymnastics classes for the kids from town. And I remember one of my teammates was really, really frustrated with one of the groups of kids that she was teaching. They would run around, they wouldn't listen to her, they would talk, and they just generally wouldn't pay attention. Finally, she had had enough, and she was really fed up, and she brought them all and said, "Sit right here." And she got up on the beam and she did a tumbling series, which involved flipping. And she was kind of mad at them, so it was perfect. And she landed everything, and then she jumped off the beam, got right in their face and said, "When you can do that, you can teach this class. But until then, you need to listen to me." And things went better for her after that with that group of kids because she had established some authority. She had shown them, hey, I can do this, and you think it's pretty cool. So if you want to learn to do gymnastics, you need to listen to me. She established her authority and was treated differently by those kids. That's kind of what's happening at the beginning of Mark's gospel. Because remember, we're in chapter 1. We don't know who Jesus is. Mark begins with John the Baptist, and then Jesus' baptism. Then Jesus spends 40 days in the wilderness. Jesus is served by angels. He calls some disciples. He goes into the synagogue. All of that happens in the first 21 verses. He packs a lot of action into a little space. But through all of that, we don't really know who Jesus is yet. Matthew and Luke have that whole birth narrative to set the stage and give us an idea of who is this man. In Matthew and Luke, we have this miraculous conception. We have angel visitors and a star in the sky. We know something is special about this guy. But none of that is present in Mark's gospel. And so here we are, and we have Jesus going into the synagogue and teaching and healing someone. Then he comes out and goes directly to the house of Simon Peter's mother-in-law, and he heals her. And then more people come to the house, and Jesus heals them. So our introduction to Jesus in Mark's gospel is that Jesus has authority. He has the authority to teach and to heal. He has authority over demons, and he can even heal on the Sabbath. So part of what is going on in this first chapter of Mark is showing everyone who Jesus is. Mark is establishing Jesus' authority. He has the authority to teach. He has the authority to cast out demons. He has the authority to heal people. Now, the second healing in that sequence is when Jesus goes into the house of Simon Peter's mother-in-law and heals her. And I will tell you truthfully, this has never been one of my favorite passages of Scripture. It drives the feminist in me absolutely crazy. Because I would read it and think, oh sure, heal the woman so she can come and serve the men. But as I've studied the passage, my outlook has changed. There's a whole lot more going on, and that way that I have always read it is just incorrect. Jesus didn't heal the mother-in-law so that she could take care of the needs of the men. He healed her because that is what he does. That is his identity. Jesus heals. That she immediately got up and served Jesus doesn't show her as less than. It shows that she is the first disciple to get it. She's the first person that understands that it is greater to serve than to be served. And a lot of what is happening in this text hinges on that question. Is it greater to serve or to be served? Simon didn't understand. He thought and persisted in thinking that being served is a greater honor. Just a few verses prior to the ones that Sarah read today, Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness. And when that temptation was over, the angels came. And do you know what they did? They served Jesus. And it's the same word there that is used later, diakono. They serve Jesus. And I hope diakono sounds a little bit familiar. To mix languages, we could say they diakonoed to Jesus. Deacon is the word that we use that comes from this Greek word. But in this passage, Jesus has shown his authority. Simon's mother-in-law got up and diakonoed to him. She showed the greater honor that is to serve. But remember, the disciples in general are presented as pretty darn clueless. They just don't understand. But the passage is pretty clear. We are called to serve, just like the angels did for Jesus, just like the mother-in-law got up and served Jesus and the disciples. The disciples are called to serve, and we are called to serve. And that service is a really big theme throughout all of Scripture. Abraham served angels unaware. Jesus served when he healed, when he taught, when he washes the disciples' feet. Simon's mother-in-law is the first deacon. She's the first disciple that understood that serving is a greater honor than being served. But it happened long before the official position of deacon was originated. It happened long before the Christian church existed, long before Stephen was charged with making sure that the widows and the orphans were served. Diakono, that verb in Greek that means to serve. Simon's mother-in-law shows us how. Now, in our congregation, we have fabulous people that are called to the office of deacon, and they serve our community. They go out and visit the sick, and they visit those who can't get out. But they are not the only ones who are called to serve. That is a calling for all of us, and it is a high honor. So later today, we will install 2 people to the office of deacon. But I ask that when we do that, you remember they are not the only ones called to serve. We are all called to diakono, to serve one another. May we live that calling out in our lives.